Hi, my name's Patricia Allingham Carlson, and this is my video of how I painted Nockamixon Pine Grove. We happen to live in an area of Pennsylvania with many beautiful parks. Nockamixon is a large park with a large lake, and it's a state park. It's beautifully kept, and it has many cool recreational activities for people. There's boat rentals. People go windsurfing. Fishermen and fisherwomen fish by the scores. There's walking, biking, hiking. There's a lot to do at Lake Nockamixon. There's even a youth hostel for people to stay overnight and explore the area. Maybe you'll get to check it out sometime. Anyway, there's a lovely pine grove where the fishermen like to hang out. They're blocked from the winds. There's picnic tables, and a lot of people catch a lot of fish. Hope you enjoy my video and give it a thumbs up. Now let's paint. The place where we visited was filled with autumn light. The water was sparkling. I laid out a simple, basic composition and started with a wash across the sky, which is the furthest background, and that's where it's best to start if you're doing a landscape composition. I started with my most intense colors, brought them down a little lighter, and then ran them down to the tree line. This is the opposite shore. When I do a tree line, I try to stagger the heights of the trees a little bit to create some asymmetry and some interest. Next, I brought in clear water, and I separated it ever so slightly from the sky so they didn't all run together. In a couple places, the sky had already dried, so I added just a bit of water to soften that tree line at the top. These were fall colors, and they were just beautiful. Working wet into wet, I knew I would have to touch them up several times to get the intensity of color I wanted. And I began with a variety of colors, including Hooker's Green Dark mixed with some indigo, cadmium yellow, a little bit of Quin Violet. In came also some vermilion, cadmium orange, and some Quin red. This was all for the first layers. I'm pretty sure the second layers included some burnt sienna and some yellow ochre as well. But use whatever colors you think are beautiful, and whatever shows up the prettiest in your compositional photo or reference or your imagination. You could see where I've concentrated the colors and made them more intense. But even those colors are going to fade as they dry on this wet on wet approach. But you know your watercolor, and that's what watercolor does. It takes a lot of layering and glazing. But it sure is fun to paint it on when it's bright and wet and flowing so nicely. I'm adding a shadowing line at the very bottom of the tree line to try to tie it to the shore and show the dampness of the lake hitting against the shore and rocks and soils, a low line of shrubs. Having this dark line along the edge helps to set it off from the lake as well, and it's something that I often do. Another trick that I often do is to leave a white line between the shore and where the water starts. Very thin and very sporadic, but it helps to add some sparkle and some separation to the meeting of the shore and the water. Again, I'm using Hooker's green dark mixed with indigo for this deep color to add little bits of shadow. And next, I'm going into my masking fluid. I want to keep some of that sparkle on the lake preserved when I paint it. Here, instead of dipping my brush into soapy water to repel the masking fluid from sticking, I'm using the end of my brush. I'm repeatedly dipping it into the bottle and drawing lines in with the hard plastic end of my brush. I could overdo this, but I can also cover it over if I do too much. Next, I'm dipping a toothbrush into the splatter paint, into the masking fluid, and I'm masking off the background and applying some splatter. This will create tiny sparkles in the water when they're dry, and I could paint over them and remove them. I like this effect, and I've tried it several times now. Now the masking will have to dry, and I go back and add some enhanced colors to the trees again. The masking is dry, and I'm laying in a very dark layer along the outer edge by the trees. The color I'm using is primarily indigo, but I've also mixed in a little bit of permanent blue. As I move toward the front edge of the water, I'm adding more of a ultramarine blue to the color in the water. And if you're wondering, on the right side where I'm not painting much, that's a shoreline. And that's where the pine grove grows. I've laid out the basic colors, and now I'm going in with more darks. Right along the shoreline it was quite dark, where there was a lot of reflection going on. And then throughout the foreground there was a lot of dark choppy waves. So I'm painting them right in, some already wet on wet and some somewhat dried. But in the areas where a lighter color streaked through, I'm trying to leave that lighter. And remember, this is all going on top of masking fluid, so it's going to look a lot different when the masking is removed. Now I decided I made the shore a little too small, so I am going over the shoreline with a damp brush, a scrubbing action, and paper towel to lift some of the extra paint that I really didn't want there. With repeated workings, you can sometimes lift a lot of paint, sometimes not so much, but it doesn't ever hurt to try. Next, I'm painting in where the little grassy knoll of the pine trees grows into the water in the land formation. There is a beautiful level of afternoon sunlight in this picture, and it's coming in from the right-hand side. It's casting some very dark shadows in amongst the pines, but there are sunlit spots that light up the grass as well as the trees and some of the branches on the pine trees. So I'm putting down my deep mixture of Hooker's Green Dark and Indigo, and I'm also adding some Quin Gold and some Cadmium Yellow in bright sunny spots. If I put too much in, I can cover them over. I'm growing some grass out into the lake and trying to ground it to the lake with those good strong dark streaky lines to the left of the land. And next I'm starting to grow the pine trees. Where they're getting painted on top of masking fluid, you can see they're broken. And that will have to be corrected when I remove the masking fluid. For these trunks, I'm mixing indigo blue with some very deep burnt umbers and sepias. Now, how to arrange the remaining trees? There's two big trees in the foreground. On the left, there's a small branch from a tree. So I just used my brushes to try to approximate where I wanted to put them. And now I'm taking off all the masking fluid that was on the lake. And look at the difference in color. I didn't think I'd put that much down. Back over on the land side, I'm adding some more darks. I'm also structuring the ground with some slopes and some shadows. To make slopes, I'm painting in diagonals. Bringing back my dark streaks into the water where the land meets the water. And then I begin to go over the water with a damp brush. This is my start. I want to blend some of the streaky lines. I want to blend some of the sparkles I put on with splatter paint. I want to take the streaky lines on across, keeping the lighter areas, and stretching over the darker areas to try to create that chop in the lake. In some areas, I'm leaving a white streaky line between the shoreline and the lake because I think it sets it off nicely. There wasn't much reflection in this choppy water that day, but I decided I'm going to put some tree reflections in anyway because I liked how it looked, and that's exactly what I'm doing. And that's your prerogative as an artist. You can add whatever you want to add. So that's what I'm doing. What do you think? I think it ties the color of the distant shoreline into the foreground just a little more. And that was part of my decision. Next, I begin to regrow the pine grove over the areas where the masking fluid removed part of them. And I'm adding two big foreground pines that lean out over the lake. They're going to have a lot of branches. Down at the bottom of the trees, I'm tying them in with dark shadows on one side and a small little area of lit up trunk on the other side. I believe these two pines become a focal point in the painting and pull it together compositionally. In the trunk of the closest tree, I used a lot of cobalt blue. In the next one back, I used a lot of purple. These were the colors that were hidden in the shadows. And I don't know if it shows up in this shot or not, but I thought it enhanced the feeling of the shadow and the darkness in the trees to put some strong, cool colors in there. I'm trying to retain some fresh, lit up areas in the trunks as well for where the sunbeams are coming down and touching them. And that's where I will add some golds and some quin golds, some yellows, because the sunlight was quite yellow at that point in the day. When I paint trees in a grove like this, I try to vary the width of the trunk. I think it helps with making forests look more natural if they're asymmetrically placed, spaced, and different sizes. Now these branches and trunks are getting marked in lightly because they're largely covered with pine branches and very dark and don't even show any detail. But there are the details of light coming through, and that's what I'm painting on. I've decided to make the pine branches that are lit up by the sun painted on very light in this gold color. I'm going to mask over all of these before I paint the darker branches on top, and then remove them and see how the sunlit areas show through. This took a lot of time, but it was sort of an experiment. I'm painting the yellow on top of the blue. It's already there on the sky. So I concentrated the color quite a good bit to make it look like it would show up. And not just turn into a pale green, but keep that yellow sun glow. I end up adding a lot more yellows than are actually there in my photographic reference. But again, I figure I can cover them over if I add too much. I can't put them back with transparent watercolor. And here comes the masking to go over all these yellows and golds. And I'll add some additional as well, just onto the blue to give me some options to add even more if I want. Here again, I'm using the end of my brush, the hard plastic end, and doing repeated dipping because I did not want to take the time and the trouble to go dip my hair end of the brush into soapy water, dry it carefully, and apply a little more soap, which helps the masking fluid to not stick onto the hairs. This is a quicker way, and that's what I'm doing. I'm applying masking fluid as well along the trunks of the trees to retain some sunlit spots there as well. Here comes that branch in on the left side. I painted in some leaves in masking. I also painted in a small branch that was lit up on the top and darker underneath. I'm adding a little bit of masking to where the distant tree line is to retain some fresh color in case my dark paint gets too heavy. And when that dries, I'm going to be getting rather dramatic with dark pine branches and a splatter bottle. Water spray, that is. Now I'm getting ready to apply this water spray and then my good dark concentrated pine branch color. I want to keep some blue sky showing through. I want to control the water splatter spray as well. So I'm applying some strips of paper to block the spray from reaching where I don't want it to reach. I can move this paper around and add more. But for right now, I want to control what I'm doing. Here's my water spray, and I've sprayed primarily the top right section. I've mixed some very concentrated color with indigo blue, a little bit of purple, and some Hooker's green dark. And I'm dotting it onto these sprays. I'm not painting it straight because I want it to be dotty. I want it to look light and airy, like pine tree vegetation. I want the blue sky showing through. And I want it to look sort of feathery. I've also applied another layer of sap green. And then I removed the masking I placed to see what I need to do next. These branches grow out over the water. And I'm following my splatter and my dotty foliage out along where the branches are. I turn my brush over and take some of that dark paint and scratch it on across to make branches. And you can see me doing that right there. Of course, you could use the hairy point of your brush, but I like to be spontaneous, and it feels good to try it that way. And now I'm painting from my reference photo and what I see. There are areas of these pine trees that are quite dark, really dark. And there are other areas where some lighter greens show through. So I'm just going with the flow, painting in shadows, more sunlit areas, keeping blue showing, delineating some branches. Where things look a little too gloppy, I give them another spray to break them up a little bit. Of course, if you spray too much, you're just going to have big globs of water and you lose all that dotty effect. So it's sort of a matter of balance and experimentation. But it is a fun way to put some leaves on, and I like it. I'm splattering a little blue in amongst there to try to pick up on some sky color. I'm adding the lighter colors onto the branch from the left side. This is mainly sap green. And then I come in with some Hooker's green dark. I've sprayed and it's going on very dotty again. Now this branch was in my photograph, and I liked how it drew a little side interest onto the other side of the painting, and that's why I decided to add it. Don't know that it was totally needed, but I think I like it. I'll know a lot more when I remove all that masking. But for right now, I'm enhancing the trunks and going back in and adding more shadows where the color dried a little too light for me. Now my next consideration was, in my photographic references, there was a little patch of wild purple asters growing up from the shoreline. I was debating whether to add them or not. First I tried to remove a little paint with a stiff brush so I could make them more clear, and that did not work. That paint did not want to lift. So I decided to add them dark, mostly in silhouette, and anywhere I had a lighter space of water, I would put purple flowers on top of the lighter space, hoping it would show up. So that's what I'm building right now. A little patch of wildflower weeds, but they're very pretty. They have a yellow center and they have delicate purple petals. Again, I wasn't entirely sure that it was going to work there, but I decided to try for it anyway. And I think I liked it. I did have to add at least 3 layers of purple to make the purple even show. What do you think? Would you have added that? I think it added a little softening to the picture. But now I'm taking off all that masking in the pine branches where I wanted the sunlight to be showing through, or rather reflecting on the branches. And boy, did I ever do it. So just when I thought I was getting toward the end of this painting, I saw that I had an awful lot of work to do still. But it's all workable, and that's what I did. To pull this together, I mixed up some cadmium orange and cadmium yellow and began to paint in all those whitish areas that are intended to be sunlit pine branches. And already it begins to blend better. I painted that same golden sunlit color along the sides of the trees where I wanted the trees lit up as well. After painting that on, I will be blending the edges together better and covering over where I've left too much light showing with darks. The more I work it, I think the more natural it's beginning to look. Can you see how all that blending and adding of the darks makes it come together in a more shadowy, more suggestive way of real pine branches? But I'm using a good reference picture, and that's given me a lot of good ideas. Trees aren't all the same color. They have a lot of variation in their clumps of foliage, whatever kind of tree they might be. You also see some burnt siennas coming in to pick up on the faint orange cast of the sun as well. It seems the more I blend, the more they're starting to look the way they're supposed to. And boy, did I blend! Here I'm coming over and softening the edges of the leaves on that branch on the left. I'm softening things so they aren't so crisp. I'm using a damp brush to blend along the edges and make them look a little softer and more natural. I liked how that looked. I did more softening with a damp brush in the trees as well. And then I decided to soften the aster stems and leaves. They're on the lower left. Just softening the edges, I think, added a nicer natural touch. But again, I'm using a damp brush, not a wet one. And sometimes I'll use a paper towel if I want to soften more. Depends on whether you want crisp or more muted. It's up to the interpretation of the artist. I use a stiffer brush when I'm softening, not a soft one. It gets the job done faster. Just about done. My last step is to find a clear spot in a streak of water to sign my name, and a better signing pen as well. There we go. And it's done. I hope you enjoyed watching my video how I painted Nockamixon Pine Grove. Being there was such a lovely experience. I wanted to recount it in watercolor. Click on a like, give me a thumbs up, it really helps me a lot. And if you subscribe, you won't miss a single video coming up in the future. I'm happy to answer your questions or to see your comments. There's some other links below to check out too, to different products I make, different products I use, and some other places I'm featured online. Check it out. Come back and paint with me again, and I'll see you next painting.